I guess we do. I guess we just have to do it. Wait, sometimes the technology doesn't technology. We just end up with a very scuffed beginning, which is fine. It is what it is. So
anyway, I'm a bad creator. That's the thing you need to know. I'm glad your audience is figuring that out right off the bat. I don't know what I'm doing.
You're not a bad creator. You just don't have a streamer skill set yet, which everybody can develop. You have a better editor skill set than I ever will. So don't call yourself a bad creator. You just create a different kind of content. That's entirely valid. Easy.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that.
EJ Crazy, thank you for resubscribing, by the way. I appreciate it. Neppy Gish, thank you for the follow as well. Jenna Rain and the winner 9588, thank you all for the follows as well. Real quick, everybody, I do want to say there is... You know what? Actually, we're just going to... For the sake of this one, I will just do the very quick... Guys, you know we're sponsored. The sponsors above me. I don't know how long they're sponsoring us for anymore. It's fine. Whatever. For like 9 or 10 more days, I think we've got a HelloFresh sponsorship, so I've got to do the let me pay the bills thing. And then there's that. But past that, how's it going, everybody? Today, my guest is Squid Tips. If you do not know Squid Tips, we've got a channel that focuses mostly on motorcycle and queer culture, and have a very, very wonderful video that I linked in my chat. It was called How I Went from Transphobe to Trans Ally, which was the first video that I saw of Squid Tips. But that's enough yapping from me. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I think you did a really great job. I'm giving up on streaming on my side. Oh, fuck it. And oh yeah, how much do you want me to like tone down swearing or anything?
You can say the fuck word, the shit word, and also there's as long as you are not saying slurs, we are a-okay.
That's easy, super easy. Okay,
that's super
cool,
easy
awesome.
For most normal people to
super
do.
normal. Yeah, yeah. So I started out as a I've just been a motorcycle guy all my life. I used to ride bikes. I got around. I was a latchkey kid, so I traveled my hometown of Vancouver, Washington, and then later Anchorage, Alaska, and now Seattle. And I got my first mocycle at like 20. I just kind of evolved to it. I totaled out a truck, and I had a little bit of extra dough, and I was like,
it was easier to get the motorcycle, and then you just absorbed into the community and the personality. There you are.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't know anything about motorcycle culture coming into it. Like a lot of people start in motorcycles in dirt bikes, or they start lower. They have like a family member who does it, and they have
like a group of bicycle friends that eventually decide that they want to get a motorcycle when they hit 18.
Yeah, and I did have that. I had a bunch of friends that did that. Yeah, and then we had like 5 or 6 of us, and then eventually I was the only one, because for some people it is a phase. But as time went on, I've gotten to know a lot of people. People just ask you about motorcycles. Motorcycles are just interesting to some people, and I think for a lot of people have considered them but are afraid or concerned, and so people just would ask me and questions constantly. How do I get into it? Where do I start? And so I eventually was like, what would be great is if I just recorded myself and put it out there and was like, here, yeah. And like that's literally where it started, was just to be an educator. And then over time, I wanted to talk about more than that. And also the reality that, Steve Jobs has this line where he talked about how Apple is the intersection of the liberal arts and technology. And I feel like motorcycles really are like the intersection of like, when you're out in the streets, like traffic management matters, politics, how people view you matters, as I talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about maybe at some point, but like you have conflict and interactions with people in the real world. And so real world things like come to you being a motorcycle rider, like people yell at you, people hate you sometimes.
There's also the issue where, and I've had to have this conversation with a few friends, and something that I learned by watching your videos was the very, very loud, like no muffler sound from the motorcycle is just a safety mechanism. It is an alert that other people need to know that you're there on the road, which is not always available for people. And I've heard some people who are friends of mine who'll go like, hey, that's really loud and obnoxious. I'm like, yeah, but it's not a car, that's a motorcycle. The car is doing it because they removed a muffler because they're an asshole. The motorcycle's doing it because they don't want to get hit. Like, that's fine.
Yeah, and you know what's funny about that is like that is actually a thing that's an opinion I've evolved on. I will say that for years and years I was kind of like, that's bullshit, man. Like your shit's just loud. Like for the most part, motorcycles are not loud by default. Like they have the same emission standards as cars. Like they are super quiet right from the dealership. But what people do, most people who are on a motorcycle, like if you're on a motorcycle, you are an enthusiast. You've already overcome a lot of societal objections to this mode of transportation, because we've got all of this. There's this culture about like, you're more of an outlaw or a rebel, or maybe even like somebody who is on the fringes of society, which is true in a lot of ways. But like you have to overcome all of that. And so you're usually like, you're really into it. So you get an aftermarket exhaust that performs better. And those are louder than stock. They're not as loud as ripping the fucking thing off, which I demonstrated in my video because it actually happened to me randomly. It fell off. And that was my emphasis, is that if you have a loud motorcycle, it's not intentional. There's no intent to hurt other people. But I sincerely did not think that like it was a safety issue for a long time. But I will say in the last like 3-4 years, like just seeing how I do lane sharing. I've been lane sharing like for about a decade, and it's not legal here. Lane sharing is where you go in between.
You go in between the vehicles.
Yeah, in between vehicles are basically using the margins of the roadway, including the shoulder, including there's a lot of
as opposed to effectively, as far as traffic congestion is concerned, being a smaller car, taking advantage of the fact that you are much smaller, like infinitely smaller than a car.
I consider it's like as a car, you need to color in the lines. A motorcycle doesn't need to color in the lines. Like you are a fifth the size, you are, or even like smaller than the average car. My motorcycle is 350 pounds and the average car is between 2,000 and 4,000, like you can just, it's as wide as my shoulders are almost,
You're able to be in more places safely because there's less tonnage on the ground.
Exactly.
No, it makes sense. Yeah. So like for me, I am not personally interested in motorcycles or motorcycle culture, but because of my channel and what I do, I am interested in the conversation where people who are trans and gay, that conversation is more interesting to me because I have an onus to want to defend those people. People in my chat know my partner is trans, though I was doing this, way before me and Saki dated and well before me and Saki met. And that's probably why the algorithm recommended the video to me that it did, because while the motorcycle stuff was not something I was going to jump on, the how I went from transphobe to trans ally, that one definitely spoke to me. If you want to go ahead and talk about that video a little bit for people in my audience who might not have seen it, maybe a truncated version of that journey.
Yeah. So I decided I was going to start building a community out of Discord in like just before 2019 or so, because I found that I just didn't exist. I was fine in motorcycle spaces. Like I'm a white dude, and the truth is that there's a very male dominance in motorcycle culture based on history and for a lot of reasons. And for that reason, you hear homophobic slurs, you hear that stuff. But I grew up playing.
It's the same problem that the construction industry has.
Exactly. These are and again, these are often blue collar people, and like. But again, I am not super. I'm very easy. I'm very hard to offend. Like I empathize with people. I understand where people come from. I got a working class background. I've changed. I don't really hold people to things. But what I noticed is I couldn't bring my friends in there. The more queer and like diverse friends I had, like I didn't feel like bringing them in.
The harder it was to bring them into the motorcycle culture because you've got the thick skin for it, and somebody else doesn't necessarily have that same thick skin.
Yeah, and other people aren't going to respect my friends the same way they might respect me. And so I decided I needed to create my own, and it was small and nothing for a very, very long time. And then this person who I think I named Johnny, let's say, I met someone basically through it, and they, in the Discord, like over time getting to know them, they actually actively like transitioned in front of me.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that in the video.
Yeah, and it was I was totally unprepared for it. Like I did not understand what was happening. It was very sudden to me because I just didn't have the same level of awareness. But I just respected them, and then they continued to share it, like the process with me, and I realized how challenging it was. I mean, and the complexity of like how you feel about yourself and how it impacts how she had a very shitty parents who like sent her to conversion camp, like very religious back. I mean, like she was literally probably what I would call torture. And so, yeah, like that level of horrific reality was like, oh my God, that's terrible. And then the 2020 protests happened. And when I went and did that, and this is all talked about in the video, and I show a bunch of footage that nobody's ever seen because it's my footage. And eventually I have a whole bunch of footage from the Chop Chaz situation, the big protest here that I'm going to do a video on eventually. But that was the other like illuminating moment, because the people who were police reform is like my number one issue, because I think it's the thing that is impacting the most Americans. It is literally killing people. It is, you know.
Oh, 100%.
I don't need to tell your audience, right?
Yeah,
like,
there was an incident that my girlfriend sent to me that I wanted to do a video on, but I haven't had the time or the spoons, where there was a black woman who had an issue, called two police officers to her house to help resolve the issue, and then like going to her sink, one of the officers freaks out and tells her to get on the ground, and she like has that moment of confusion, like, what? This is my safe place. What the fuck is going on? And in that moment of confusion, the officer apparently thought that she was trying to get a weapon and then shot her. And that's the problem is that I'm vague enough on the details because I haven't done the story, which would cement it more in my brain. I'm vague enough on the details that I probably just described like 5 or 6 different incidents that have happened without realizing it, and that's a fucking problem.
Terrific.
There's also and that also kind of bleeds into the racial component of it as well, is that we have a higher representation of police that will be around black neighborhoods, and then we suddenly get a bunch of racists using the FBI statistic, the 1351, where they'll say like, oh, despite being 13% of the population, they make up 50% of the violent crimes. Like, yeah, but if 90% of the cops are policing their neighborhood, they're gonna report more of those crimes. That's just what happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of... Yeah. I mean, the cops are justified in this country for totally different reasons than what they actually exist to do, which is to protect property and the wealthy and the political class. Like, that's just what they exist for. Yeah, my history, I before that, this trans ally video, the video that kind of blew up my channel prior was a cop pulled a gun on me in the middle of traffic, and I got it all on video, and I ended up suing my local sheriff's department, and I forced them to change, because the big thing was that the guy didn't get in like any trouble. It was a 1-day suspension at the end of the day, and it was because in their rules they were like, we don't have anything that explicitly says that pointing a gun at you is force, so we're just going to say that that's not an inappropriate use of force.
Which is weird, because pulling a gun on somebody is, in most states, a crime in and of itself, which is sentenciable up to 5 years. Just taking the gun out and aiming at somebody, not even pulling the trigger, not even having it loaded, is a sentenciable offense. And yet, when a police officer does it, it's somehow in a different category. This is one of the reasons why I actually had an argument. And I don't remember the person's name, but when I went up to canvas for Jamal Bowman, there's obviously a bunch of people who are different flavors of left. Some are liberal, some are communists, some are socialists. Like, that's where I sit. I'm more of a, hey, the proletariat's a very important thing to talk about. We need to get capital away from CEOs. Like, that's my thing. So I tend to end up having more disagreeable conversations with people who are more towards the center, more liberal. And one of the conversations I had while I was at that event, which I didn't talk about on my channel because it didn't really matter, was the conversation about whether or not police officers were considered working class. And my position is that no, they are not. They are not working class. They are, if we are looking at it from a class warfare perspective, they are representatives a couple rungs below bourgeoisie. That is what they are. That is their job. And I would call the
job working class, but their role is
role in society
has nothing to do with the working class.
Their role in society is not. Their role in society is to make sure that the working class do not infringe on the people above. Like that's
why the one union that we do not support is the police union. Yes, that's the only union we don't support. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I maybe that distinction was not something that I had thought of when I was having that conversation. So maybe that distinction between the position in society versus what the actual job is in terms of its income and benefits are two different things. And I think that was the sticking point that the more liberal person that I was talking to disagreed on with. And from my point, I'm coming from a family that it's a very military family. We have people who've worked in the police force. So like I have a bias here, but even with that bias, I'm like, no, that's not a working class position. Not in terms of the roles we all have in society. Not really. If there's a different set of rules that they get to live by that involves them killing people that I love or aiming a gun at people that I love, and they don't have to get punished for those the way that I do, then they play by a different set of rules. And that's just how that's just how it is.
Yeah, and they're propagandizing us with our tax dollars. You know, that's the other thing, right? They're taking our money and then they're killing us with it. Like it's really, the more you like break it down to its fundamental, the more it's just a very fucked up thing that like,
I mean,
again,
when you're a class of people that gets to use tax dollars to fund actual movies and TV shows being made specifically to paint you in a better light than what we used to do in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Yeah. Propaganda is a thing, and as much as I want to say, hey, there's this one YouTuber that did a really good video on propaganda, unfortunately, that YouTuber is Illuminati. And
you should watch Jackson over he does a whole series. So he's based out of Seattle too. Okay. He goes by I will go to YouTube here in a minute and find it. I've actually got a couple of videos on propaganda. I've got a 3-video series that YouTube hated because Motorcycle Guy isn't supposed to just suddenly make 3 videos about police reform and like policing. YouTube doesn't like that for some reason.
When the BLM protests got in their second wave, right? Because 2016 was the first big one that everybody knew about. The second wave around COVID. When the second big wave of BLM protests was happening that everybody was aware of, I made a video to the tune of one of the themes from Detroit Become Human, where all of the synths in that game are not treated like people, but they have all of the same. They're as cognizant as people, they're sentient like people, but they get abused and treated as second-class citizens, and they start rising up. So some of the music that I used from that, I played that music over all of the instances of violence that was happening against BLM protesters, and YouTube took it down because they're like, no, you're not allowed to show violence. I'm like, well, I grabbed all these clips from YouTube, from news organizations. You just didn't like that I put it together to music that hinted something. That's what you didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the ways that these platforms are inherently conservative is that they protect that. Skip Intro is on YouTube. It has literally a whole series. They've gone through Paw Patrol. That was the big one. Like I don't watch Paw Patrol, but I was like, holy shit, this is actually insane propaganda going to our children. He just had one that came out about To Catch a Predator, and he talks about how those people, someone unalived themselves in response to what happened.
The To Catch a Predator shit was a wild ride to go down, realizing that like, what was it, only like 3 to 5% of the people who were caught in Wow, why did my thing just reset? Weird. Let me fix that. For some reason, my Opera just reset everything. There we go. But the fact that like most of the people who were caught on To Catch a Predator never got sentenced, nothing ended up happening to them in terms of the legal system, but then they had this stain on their name forever afterwards. It was really kind of fucked up because that was not the narrative that was sold in the show. The narrative that was sold in the show was like, and these people are going to they're going to pay for society for what they've done. That's not what fucking happened.
It also misinforms people because, like, the reality is abuse is happening largely from people we know, not
the abuse is not happening from the random dude on AOL. The abuse is largely happening elsewhere. This actually got way worse. So I forget what her name is, but I did a video on her. There was this Latina representative who was trying to be a representative in Georgia Congress, and all of her advertisements were like, you guys shouldn't be happy with Mexican immigrants. I'm the only one you should like. And all of her advertisements for herself were like, I think the main one she said was, don't be weak and gay, vote for me. Was one of the ones that she used.
Yeah, they did see that, yeah.
So if you look further into all of her videos, she actually did a couple of To Catch a Predator, not actual episodes of the show, but
like her own version.
She did her own version of To Catch a Predator. And I could not find for the life of me any public arrest records or anything for these arrests that she was showing with people who looked like police officers with cars and everything. Like, oh, it's all just staged bullshit because people were already primed by Chris Hansen.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
And to go back to the thing that started this, so that's why all of these are great reasons why policing is like my big thing.
It's your big thing.
So when I did the chop, when I went to when the 2020 protests happened, I was extremely activated and ready to like get in the streets. I was like, let's fucking go. Mm-hmm. And we kicked, like, cops left a precinct, like totally abandoned a precinct in Seattle. And I was there all the time. It was like I was on a massive high, but the people leading the organizers were POC, women, queer people. I was white men were not the activators there.
And I realized almost as if it's because most of us get to live very comfortable lives because most of the stuff doesn't tend to affect us as much.
Yeah.
Weird,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean,
it's almost like we have some
white city too.
It's almost like we have some kind of privilege that puts us in a position for that I'm constantly told doesn't exist by people around me, but it's so strange that they have to tell me that.
Yeah. So I saw that and I was like, these are my people. And I realized, oh, I connect more with marginalized people because of the life that I like. That was like the beginnings of my like real like class consciousness and like and connection. And so I was like, and people came to me. I was surprised. I had a black coworker, a black lesbian woman come to me and afterward, and like literally it changed our relationship totally different. Like she was like hugging me and thanking me, and she explained to me, she's like, I do not feel safe. I wanted to be there. I was excited to see it, but I didn't feel safe. And the fact that you went out and did it meant something to me. And that was like oh, like if I put these symbols up, that means things to those people that I want to connect more with. And I want to.
It triggers that safety response. They know that you're a safe person to be around. I found something like somewhat similar for me when I started using the female avatar on my character as a joke because my community kept gender bending me in fan art. But this weird thing happened when I started using that avatar. I would get trans people in my audience that said, hearing your voice through that avatar actually like affirmed me a little bit, and now I feel like that gave me the confidence I needed to go start like doing HRT, like to go start down that journey. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that was gonna fucking happen. I did it for the funny ha-ahs, but you know what? If that's a side effect of it, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Sure, why not?
I never would have thought of that. That's interesting, but I can totally see it.
I think that's the thing is that like it. So for me, I'm a cis hetero white guy. It's not going to occur to me because it's not something that my brain's wired to think about. I have to be taught that because it's not part of my lived experience. And I think that's probably the same thing that you ended up dealing with there too, is that feeling of, oh, this symbol means safety to this person now. It didn't occur to you until somebody explained it to you.
Yeah, and that's also why I kind of operate the way I do. Like I just generally, have strong opinions held loosely, like that's kind of how I feel. Like I am so open. I've had so many times like that where I'm like, oh my God, my lived experience prevented me from understanding this giant thing that is actually super important and is the core of like what made. I didn't even realize that was my niche on YouTube and on content platforms was the motorcycle guy who is welcoming and inclusive. I just had no idea that didn't. Not only did that not exist, but it was like people didn't realize it didn't exist, and the moment that they saw it, they wanted it, and they were like, "Oh my God!" Yeah. It created a deep connection with people. And like, yeah, I'm dating a trans person now that I never would have met had I not made that video. And like that video specifically, the trans ally video, changed the entire course of like not just my YouTube channel, but my life. Like I'm not married anymore. I'm like, I don't look like, you can go back in 3 years and look at my content. It is different. I am different. You
look like so the content from earlier, I guess the best way to put it is you looked more put together, but not in the like put together is good and not put together is bad way, but more in the very, very conscious is how people are going to look at you as a person. Whereas now you seem far more comfortable. Now you seem far more like, no, this is just what I want to wear. So this is what I'm going to wear. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I was in a relationship that kind of where that was kind of reinforced, and I didn't realize I was in a relationship with somebody who had a Catholic background, and I didn't really had opinions about how they wanted me to look, and like I'm now with people who are far more like, if that makes you happy, do that. Oh, you look, you know, like they're just generally supportive of trying and do like my nails is not like doing my nails is something I started doing a year or so ago, just fucking around.
Yeah, just
and I kept doing it because I was like, oh, I don't bite my nails anymore. Like I literally just
because
stopped.
you care about maintaining the image that you've done to you care about maintaining the work you've done. So now suddenly one of your like anxiety stems disappeared.
Yeah, and I didn't realize how much of that was impacting me. But it's totally visible, like going back through and yeah, people comment on it. I get comments that just like you from old friends that are like, dude, you just seem happier and lighter now. And like that was a cloud over my life that in the same way that like, and again, that's like going back to like I can relate to trans people in the like societal pushing norms and stuff onto me. It's not as bad, obviously.
The minute you were more
like,
comfortable in your skin, suddenly that stopped mattering as much.
Yeah, and I can't imagine having it be, you know, wanting to be that different and having society, you know, and that frustrate. Like I just painted my nails and changed my hair, you know, like that wasn't a challenge. You did
it for fun, and
then and I can undo it just as easily, you know, and that's the trans experience is far more complicated than that.
Now, so, for instance, before dating a trans woman, I was not aware that, like, a period existed for trans women. That was not a thing that occurred to me. And then one day, Saki missed her medication for a week because ADHD did a thing. She didn't think about it. And suddenly, like, all of those symptoms that I'm like, oh, when I've dated cis women, this is what a period looks like. And you're going through it right now because you haven't had the hormone. Oh, it's the same shit. Oh, and then there's a friend of ours who goes to the Magic the Gathering tournaments with us, and that conversation came up because this is a much more conservative person who's the type of conservative person that is okay being around trans and queer people, but will hold opinions in their chest about them to a degree. And so one of the conversations that was had when he did the whole like, and trans women don't get periods, and I just went, actually they kind of do. They do. Like, once they've been far enough on HRT, that does happen. It's like, oh, well, I thought they had to have a womb for that. I'm like, well, so the thing is, the womb is just the place where that experience is happening for a cis woman, but for any woman, those cramps are it is the body saying, hey, hormones are doing shit. Like, that is the layman's terms of it. It's hormones doing shit. Anybody's body with the same hormones and the same levels is going to do the hormones doing shit when the hormones aren't there, when they aren't doing what they're supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think again as men, like that was another experience that I was opened up to was like the complication that it's also not just like crampy. It's like my ex, like her depressive symptoms would be a lot more aggressive during that time, and like, you know, she just had to lay in bed kind of all day every day for
your spoons just get ripped away.
Not going, she couldn't go to work someday, you know, like she called in sick almost every time it happened, at least one day, you know, because it was so bad. And like, yeah, as men, we just like, especially like we really do not understand the experience, and like it's easy to just essentialize into like one or two things or like decomplicate because we don't know that life.
Yeah, it's our brains going, okay, I don't have that experience, I have an allegory for it, and I can kind of sandwich a bunch of experiences together to make something that looks like a facsimile of what you're experiencing, and that's about it. And also, just in general, that there's another aspect of it that's a little infuriating. We are, as guys, kind of told to be desensitized towards that kind of stuff. It's one of the issues that when I've talked about like toxic masculinity on my channel. And then, of course, you get pushback from right-wing people on that. So, like, masculinity isn't toxic. I didn't fucking say that masculinity is toxic. I said that there are aspects to how we're told to act as guys that is bad. And one of those things is our empathy centers being made fun of. Because that shit will just happen. When you have empathy for someone, people will look at you like, oh, I remember years ago, my manager telling me that I shouldn't be trying to be a white knight because somebody like lost a wallet, and I wanted to try to figure out whose wallet it was. He's like, it's not your problem. You don't need a white knight. I'm like, But if that were me in that situation, I would want somebody to do that. He's just like very dismissive. Like I'm just sitting there trying to understand why people are telling me to be dismissive about that. And they're that way when like you end up crying or you talk about crying. They're that way when you talk about, you know, any conversation about, say, sexuality or anything emotional at all. You're basically told, like, hey, don't feel that, don't think that, or that's not a thing you should be doing in public. If I'm gonna do it in public, I'm gonna fucking do it in public. I'm sorry. Yeah,
well, I mean, like, inherently, so many systems and so many things, like, to keep things the same, you have to not change as an individual. You have to not get input. You know, you have to not leave your house. You have to not talk to people. Like, that's the only way to stop change, because change is an inevitable process. Everybody is they're not a person. You're a process. Like, that's like one of the person I was at 20 said slurs and thought they were funny, you know, like, and had a totally different set of people around me with a totally different life.
People who were reinforcing that for you.
Yeah, and like that was just who. And I knew no trans people, and like the world was very different. And like I am not, you know, and like that has allowed me to given me more grace for other people too. And that's going to some of the things that we talked about, bringing to this conversation specifically about building community. Is one of the things I try to reinforce in people is that we really we got to start with listening. We got to start with listening to other people, like truly listening and hearing and what they want to say, because there's no way to be persuasive if you are not listening, if you do not understand the core problem or the core disconnect in a conversation.
Actually, I had a conversation with a friend of mine at the card shop about this. This person is a very progressive person. They're gay, they're black. I think they've been very progressive their entire life, but I haven't known them their entire life, so I don't have a good barometer for what that is, and I haven't had that conversation. But the conversation about racism came up one day when we were at the card shop, and he basically said that he didn't understand how somebody can ever be that hateful. And as somebody who used to be a far more hateful person, I grew up at a Christian private school as like the one white kid in a black neighborhood, but going to an affluent school. It was a very like weird upbringing for me. I had to have the conversation of, the problem is that the racist person doesn't think they're racist. They're not the villain of their story. They don't understand that that's what they're doing. Like, as an example, there's a family member of mine, who I'm not going to name for obvious reasons, who said the N-word to me in a family setting. It was very uncomfortable. I called him out on it, and then he said the phrase. It was during the BLM protest. Said, "Well, then they need to stop. They need to start acting like people and stop acting like N-words." And it was one of those things where, like, oh, that's the divide in your brain. That's how you tell yourself you're not racist, because you've got black friends because they act right. That's how you're circumventing that in your brain. And then I had the conversation with another family member who was close to them, like, hey, this is a problem. We need to figure out a way to address it. I'm not coming to any family gatherings for like a solid 3 months, because that was a thing. I need that to stop.
Yeah, that's in 2020, that would be hard in 2020. That's funny. That's the example I give in my story. I was raised by my grandparents. So they're, when I was 5, they were in their 30s, 40s. And I distinctly remember my grandmother saying the exact same thing. Well, there's black people and then there's N-words, right? And and it was the N-word was the thug. I mean, it's the modern thug, right? Like it's that aspect of it.
If we were a few generations behind, they'd be using the word uppity.
Yeah.
If we were a few generations behind, that would be the word that they would use. So they'd be like, I'm not saying they're bad, I'm just saying they're this. Like, no, well, actually, no. When you say that, it's like a Southern person saying, bless your heart. They're actually saying that you've got some mental deficiencies. That's what they're trying to say. They're actually being a little ableist when they say that, but they're never going to admit that. Bless their hearts.
Yeah, and like when you're raised in that world, again, like we're raised in that world, and this is like, I was born before the internet was like super popular, but I got on it early, and like that was another thing I didn't really realize would happen through my video, was the number of people who said, wow, thank you for explaining this. I never really understood where these bigoted people were coming, like where they were getting these ideas from. And it's just, we're so shaped by our parents, and by the environment like that we're just born to. And it takes deprogramming, and we're also young. Like, I think that as I've gotten older, the wisdom with age thing has become more apparent to me. And it's literally just like the context to say, you know what, I'm upset in this moment, or like this bad thing happened, but like life will go on, or like, being able to put things in a greater context.
It's okay to let little things roll off your back because you know that there's something big. As an example, if somebody says one of those very bigoted things around you, you've got a couple paths ahead of you. You can completely denounce them and disavow them. It's probably never going to change them as a person, but you can do that. You can sit down and politely explain that, hey, that's not really okay to say around me, but I do want to talk about why that's not okay to say about me. If you're okay saying that thing, I feel like maybe you owe me the time to have this chit chat. That's probably going to go about a little better than like yelling them down or shouting them down or doing the straight disavowalment, at least in the beginning, unless you find after a while this person's just never going to change. There are some people like that any amount of soft parenting, let's go ahead and call it, is not enough to get them to realize where they're wrong on a situation. I did have an instance where that happened. It's an example I've talked about on my channel. There's a really conservative person who used to be a friend of mine who we would go over to his house and play Dungeons and Dragons because, and for his sake, he really enjoyed being around queer people and POC and people who were very accepting because he worked in construction. So his environment was that very macho, masculine, let's make fun of you for every single thing that you are or do that's even slightly different than the norm. And he hated it, but he had never grown out of it. So he would surround himself with people who didn't make fun of him for those things, didn't treat him like less than because he had a tattoo on his neck in memory of his wife. Like things that they would make fun of and call him a sissy for, we just kind of accept like that's who you are and that's okay. So we were over at his house, and my partner at the time was not able to function at peak capacity for a long time because she had an ovarian problem where her ovaries were constantly, like, effectively trying to kill her. Her doctor told her, hey, this also means you can't really have kids, because if you try to have kids, your insides are going to twist you apart. Like, there's no chance that the kid's gonna live. There's a high chance you're not going to live. The safest thing for you to do is remove these. And so when that happened, there were a lot of conversations of you should try to have kids first and stuff that we kind of let roll down our backs. Finally, one night, after several instances of soft racism, soft sexism that would lead to a conversation that we thought, oh, he's getting a little better about certain things. Finally, one day, we're sitting at a commander table, and he's drunk enough to say that she shouldn't have gotten rid of her ovaries. And she responds like, okay, well, the only other option would have been for me to die. Like, that's what the only other option here would have been. Oh, and we seem to have lost squid tips. Gone. Disappeared. Out into the aether. Oh god, no, it's all gone. Yeah, you can see half of me there now. Oops. So now everything is working correctly.
Yeah, I don't know.
To a degree. Hey, I learned after we had that hiccup in the stream that I could turn you from a 4:3 image to a proper 16:9 image. I didn't realize I could do that.
Oh, hell yeah.
But now you look like you have proper proportions instead of being surrounded by two bars like watching an old show on a new monitor.
Okay. Yes. Excellent. Well, then I'm glad everything broke, because look, this is how we progress. This is how things get worse before they get better. That's what your audience needs to remember.
To conclude the story thing before we move into anything else, after he said that the thing about the ovaries, and I started packing up our cards after that, and just like, nope, this is a you've had too much alcohol. This is a we pack our stuff up and we talk about this tomorrow when you're sober. That's what this is. And he started just going, hey, why are you packing everything up? Like, well, you said something that was a bridge too far, so we're gonna talk about this tomorrow instead of right now, because obviously right now is not the time. And then his response, and my audience knows this story, very well by now, his response was, "That's the problem with you liberals. You never want to have a conversation." And I just kind of had to stop and went, you know what my job is, right? My job is this conversation every day, whether I want to talk about it or not. That's my job all the time. And eventually I ended up did have a yelling and screaming match with him, and had to be physically restrained by my partner and pulled out of the house because there's a certain point where, like, don't tell the person who I'm in a relationship with that they should have died. Like, don't do that.
Yeah,
that's a bridge too far. So
yeah, you know what? I have a very similar story. A friend I've known for 22 years, a guy I played football with in high school, a guy who worked for my parents at a Quiznos, you know, together, like that we lived together for years. Like I've known this guy I've been to his wedding. He went to and when I started dating my trans girlfriend, you know, it began the conversation of like, he's always had the same, like, you're gay. Like that's just always been his joke, right? Is like you're throughout my life. That's
one of them. You're queer, that kind of thing.
You know, and especially in a sports context and that construction context, like just being called gay or whatever for whatever reason, like it's just common, you know.
It's how it is.
He never
good
really.
Or bad.
Yeah, and he never really evolved past that, and I don't care personally. Like I'm again very thick-skinned, doesn't bother me, do whatever. I've rolled with it the whole time.
Yeah, but when your partner's concerned,
well, that's when
she
changed.
Doesn't owe him that.
Yeah, and that's when it changed because I was like, he basically would make the comment. I would say something. I wanted to talk about her because I wanted to talk about my new relationship. I was excited about it, and he just never really had the positive attitude towards it. Like he kind of had a very standoffish attitude, and for about a year I just kind of slowly expanded and got more into it, but he would continue to send me kind of like Instagram reels and stuff that were where gay was the joke, and it all kind of culminated in one where it's ableist too, you know. It's like, hey, blah blah blah, you're R word, and the guy, or no, sorry, I think autistic or something. Anyway, but he's like, and a doctor tells this to the patient. The patient's like, oh, thank God, and they're expressing this relief because they finally got this. It's playing on the trope that people get a diagnosis to justify their bad behavior rather than just, you know, learning and growing from it or whatever. But the punchline is they're like, oh, also you're gay, and the guy says, what, you know, and he panics about it, right? and I'm like, yeah, and it's like, what? And I'm like, I'm like such a gay man, and I sent him a photo of me and my trans girlfriends, and if you go look at it, they're gorgeous. I mean, like I'm a very fortunate man, but like I'm like they pass. They would absolutely pass in most contexts, you know, and I'm like, look at this clearly gay man with his gay, like in this gay relationship. I'm like, I'm trying to call attention to like, dude, you're really focused on this.
You keep saying, so I am the kind of asshole to just blurt out, my God, you are more focused on my girlfriend's genitalia than me. And that's weird. That's so strange. Maybe you should think about that. Or in this case, stop thinking about it.
Well, and this was the moment. And so I had kind of like soft pedaled it for like a year. And this is the moment where I was like, and I stopped and I said, look, I'm going to lay it really clearly out for you. In the real fucking world, people attack in the last year and a half, somebody has attacked my trans girlfriend in a bathroom, a woman and her kids. Like, they are afraid to go outside. They are afraid to exist in context I fear nothing in. I'm like, this is not this joke. I get that we've had this for a long time, but like in the real, like this now fucking matters to me, and you can do whatever you want to me, but I need you to respect my girlfriend. Like, they are important to me. Yeah. And after that, and this dude is a gigantic dude. He is like 6 foot. People think I'm buff. This dude is bigger. And he said his entire life, his big thing is like, he's a macho guy. He's like a not afraid of anything type of guy. And that motherfucker was too much of a pussy to even respond back to me after our 22-year relationship. And we haven't talked fucking since. But like, so I totally get like how some people, it's just like, there's something there again. And I think it's his own, it's very strange. He has gay and queer friends. Like he knows another guy who who dates trans women, and it's not the same thing because for whatever reason with me, and I don't know, but yeah, it sucks.
It's weird. It's like for some people, and this is me like armchair psychologying a little bit, which is not fair to most people. Nobody deserves a diagnosis from a streamer with no expertise. But if I were to armchair psychology a little bit, it's almost as if the more comfortable somebody is with you as a person, the more comfortable they are letting their bigotries slide. And instead of addressing their bigotries as bad things, they kind of channel it through humor and feel like that's because humor is a coping mechanism for a lot of people for a lot of things. It's why we get dark humor from people who have gone through really, really bad experiences. You get a lot of like ex-military people who have very dark senses of humor because they've quite frankly seen some of the worst shit that happens in humanity. The stuff coming out of their mouth is nothing to them anymore. I recognize that there may be a part where instead of addressing that bigotry, they're joking about it, playing it off, because it lets them be comfortable saying the thing instead of internalizing it and saying it in a way that it doesn't seem to offend everybody around them, thus not making them confront needing to change. That's my armchair psychology thing. I could be entirely off base.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I also think it's like for me, it's the context we've existed in. Our relationship being so long, 20 years is a long time to know somebody.
It's
and
a very
again,
long
he
time
knew
to
me.
have a friendship.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I was a different person when we first met than I am now. And the growth, he's done a lot of growth too, but sometimes people just drift apart. Like he still lives in Alaska where we met, and he has a different series of friends,
Alaska's
now. And so
very conservative.
Yeah, and so he's just kind of going a different. Well, Alaska's a weird. I would call it more libertarian. It's like a truly independent state.
I guess that's more fair.
You get the government money. You get the government money every year. Everyone loves their government money. Nobody turns away the free Alaska money. But yeah, so I think that's part of it too, is age. A lot of the queer people I've met through my community, or especially the younger ones, they talk about challenges in engaging with their parents, and their parents won't listen to them about things. And I think that's part of it, is that sometimes, your parents have a context with you from when you were young, and it makes it really hard for them to accept critique and criticism and education from somebody that they took care of.
You're still the little baby that needs to be educated on how to open up the peanut butter jar. Like that's what you are.
Yeah. It's a bias for sure. Yeah.
It's definitely a bias. I think, though, I do want to pivot a little bit to how we actually started getting involved with each other. Not in that way. Although, now that I've said that, my audience is going to make fan art because they are known for that. My co-host that I talk about politics with all the time on Wednesdays, Vice Rhino, and later tonight we're actually going to have Forrest Salkai on, who did the video Sex and Sensibility, which is a breakdown of all of the science of gender and why it's not as complicated as conservatives seem to pretend it is. Like, if you're in this space, you already know most of the information, but it's a very, cold breakdown of it going, no, you don't understand. Even sex is bimodal. Let's talk about Klinefelters. Let's talk about intersex. Let's talk about the different ways the body fucks shit up. This is so we're gonna have Forrest on later, but Rhino, the longer we do content together, the more people just post fan art of me and him in a relationship, despite the fact that I have my partner there, he has his partner up in Canada, but they're just like, nope, they're two content creators together, we ship it.
So just then for your audience, if you're gonna ship me, know that I have a furry avatar. That's I'm a yin.
No, don't tell them.
I'm a yin, so you can find the sticker on my sticker store. It's at sticker.rip/squid tips, and you'll see my little yin. I posted it in your Discord, so that's just to be clear. That's the way the
representation.
Yeah, so I just want to give more ideas for the creativity.
Just in case.
Don't think that this is all there is.
Just in case they need to torture me further with more people I need to be shipped with every time. But you and I started talking because we're both involved in the City of Overton project, which should be out. Technically, it's supposed to be out later this month, but I've also said, hey, don't let crunch be a thing. That's bad. Please do the mental health stuff first. So if it doesn't come out this month, that's entirely okay. But do you want to go ahead and talk about how that conversation started for you getting involved in that project?
Yeah, I'm sure it was very similar to you, where Molly probably reached out to you and was like, we're doing a thing. You want to be a part of this? And doing voice acting and stuff. I love acting. Acting is fun. I don't know if it comes off this way. I love attention. I was a theater kid in school.
Every single YouTuber on some level is a closet narcissist. And the evidence of that is that we think that what we have to say is important enough for you to not only listen to, but pay us for, either directly on places like Patreon or indirectly by watching content that has advertisers on it. Either way, we think that our opinions are worth something. So yes, I get it.
I like to be an entertainer. I like to entertain people. Like that's that's why I'm really good at ripping. I like to rip wheelies up and down my street. I just like to entertain the kids. But yeah, so when she offered that, I was like, oh my God, being in a video game.
Perfect.
You probably know who James Stephanie Sterling is.
Yes.
Yeah, like when she started doing fucking voice acting and stuff, I was like, man, I want to do that too. So this is the first time someone offered me. I'm like, I am in.
Hell yeah.
And the project was so fun, and it was such a great learning experience, and it was so cool to like do it, like the back and forth. Look, we had real people involved. I was afraid it wasn't just going to be a really jank like nothing, because obviously when you're on the internet and you're on YouTube, people think, oh, you're going to start getting ads and people want you for things. That's really awesome. But it's like most of it is dog shit that makes, it's people asking you to sell things that make nothing, or vaporware or whatever. So it was like a real thing. Yeah.
Technically, I shouldn't be saying that, but also, yes, I understand.
Yeah. So but it was fun, and I got to play. I only had a small character in it. They're calling it an amygdaloid, which is like I think it's they're a lizard type person, and I think it's based off of being more.
We are green machines, brother.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and I got to play like I basically pulled out my Mark Wahlberg, and I did like a Boston accent because it just kind of fit, and it was super cool. And then I guess I did so well, they invited me to play one of the main antagonist, this character called Stuart, who is basically this
the social
PC
justice
principal.
warrior.
Yeah, like he's like PC principal basically, but it's super annoying. He's also supposed to, I think, kind of represent the white liberal, and I put on a really like silly voice, but I get
that was offensive to people 35,000 years ago. How dare you disrespect their thoughts?
Oh man, I have some great lines. I mean, like they sent me like clips of my own, and they're like, "Oh, this is amazing," and it's been so fun. So I've been glad, and I'm excited to see it. It's a very unique game, like all like practical, and I'm excited to play it.
I'm excited for it too. I want to play it, even though so the character I'm voicing is Tim, who's I want to say the main character, but it's not a totally honest thing to say because I know how the story is. So, and I know I'm not spoiling enough when I say that, so that's fine. I
don't even know how you spoil the game. The game is so...
It's very hard to spoil what the game is, but I am confident in saying that I play the main character, Tim, and the fact that I'm the main character is also a goddamn lie. But that's fine. You'll figure that out when you pick up the game. So, when I was contacted, I'm very wary of sponsorships for the same reason that you are. Most of the time, the ones that I take nowadays are either like long-standing ones that I've had for years. DDLG Playground is one that I've had for like 5-6 years, so I trust them. But like the HelloFresh sponsorship, that one's through Stream Elements because they're a trusted middleman platform. So I'm not super wary where their stuff is concerned. But when Molly reached out to me, it raised all of those alarm bells of, this might be a little skeezy. But then she mentioned all the people that are involved in the project, and one of them was Lily Simpson. And Lily, while I may not be friends with Lily in any meaningful way, years ago I did go on her stream to yield my Alex Jones impersonation for a reading of a Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder smut fanfic as the narrator. for charity, and she got a $3,000 donation during that, so I can now say canonically I have a $3,000 Alex Jones impression, which I'll hold forever. But because of that, I reached out to Lily, and I'm like, hey, I know we haven't talked a lot since that thing, but I heard that you're involved in this project. I need to know, is this on the up and up? Because I've seen these types of scams before. I want to make sure that I'm, not running headfirst into one. She's like, oh no, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly reasonable. Like, okay, cool. I trust your opinion on this. You're the one person on this team that I know on some level. So sure. Because I knew you were involved, but again, we had never had a conversation. So despite me going, yeah, that's a content creator I know, that's not the same thing as this is a person whose stream I've been in a voice chat with. There's a different rapport there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, and Molly just came off totally different. I just questioned people. I basically spent the first hour. I think I was high and drunk, and when I do that at night, sometimes I'll just talk to people on Discord for long periods about whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that we just had a lot of conversations about her existence. I think she's out of, I don't want to dox or anything, but she's very involved. She's been very involved in democratic politics and stuff, and realizing how much that influenced the game and how this was a passion project. I mean, the
game is called The City of Overton. Anybody with a first year of political knowledge knows what an Overton window is.
Yeah. Yeah. So she just came off totally legit. And I was like, fuck it. I mean, worst case, worst case, it's an experience. And that's very much that's a motorcycle rider attitude too. And just send it, see what happens.
Whereas for me, I come from a very skeptic background. That's we actually had the conversation before the stream of how my channel started as an atheist skeptic channel and evolved into a political channel. So whereas yours was, let's do the aggressive vibe check and see what happens. Mine was, let's go check the sources. Let's go check the citations. That's very different habits leading to the same area of coalescence.
Yeah, on that, hey, just this is a total shout out to one of the best people in my community, Kuma. Kuma, I was so excited to have somebody when I mentioned coming to talk to you that they were the skeptic, from the atheist YouTube. Mm-hmm. Oh, I know that person. That was and telling me how you brought them out of religion and knowing that had you not done that, they wouldn't be in my community. And I thought that was super cool.
Now, I was really excited about that as well, though there was a part of me that was so I know when I was doing that content, there were some times where I would say something nightmarishly stupid that 3 or 4 years later me would look back on and go, maybe that was the bad thing to say. So it's man, I hope it's good stuff. I hope it's good stuff they're saying. If we're talking that far back, I don't remember all the things I said, so I'm hoping it's okay.
I would be afraid to, when he said his atheist YouTube, I thought, I also
You're
started
thinking Thunderfoot, Sargon of Akkad, that kind of community.
Exactly.
So to be fair, so the way that I got involved watching atheist content was years ago. I was dating, this is a decade ago now, I was dating a feminist, and I'd use the term feminist specifically because they were the very exists on Tumblr and gets their opinions from blog posts type of feminist, and that I remember always coming to barbs with this person. Despite us having a 4-year relationship, I would still confront them on a lot of things because it didn't vibe with me, because I was a person who grew up in a Christian private school, Republican or at least the side of the family that I grew up with the most was very Republican. So I would always come to blows with them verbally about this kind of stuff. So when we got out of our relationship, I found YouTubers like Thunderfoot in the atheist skeptic community. And I remember specifically thinking the thought, oh, I wish I had found these videos back when we were dating. I would have had so much more ammunition, which is the sign that was not a healthy feeling, right? That's a very begrudging feeling to have for no good reason whatsoever. But because the YouTube algorithm is what it is, watching that content eventually led me to watching Godless Cranium, watching Viced Rhino, and other more progressive content creators, which is still surreal to think that one of the people I was watching going into becoming a YouTuber is now the person I run a show with every single Wednesday. That's a weird thought still, but it's a thought that I'm happy about. So seeing a lot of those YouTubers as a result of them being adjacent to people like Thunderfoot, who were doing a lot of like Anti-Anita Sarkeesian content at the time, it kind of softened me on a lot of those thoughts, because I went, oh, these people that I respect as content creators are saying things like gender is a social construct. Maybe I can do a little more research into this instead of just being abrasive about it. And after starting my content, I ended up, there was a debate I would have with another YouTuber later on about gender, and I went, okay, I need to study up on this hard. So I found a friend who was a sociologist and went, hey, do you have any papers I can read on this? And she linked me to a paper called Doing Gender, which is from the 80s. Like, this is old qualitative research that has been cited thousands of times, that is literally foundational to a lot of studies on gender that we've done now. So I went, oh, this fits all of the criteria in the skeptic part of my brain. We're like, this is well cited, this is well sourced, this is well researched. Let me go ahead and go through this and start figuring this stuff out, and came out the other side going, oh, yeah, I was just wrong. I was just wrong. That's all it was. I was just fucking wrong.
But
okay.
That's so great though, because I think coming out of the atheist, I'm sure it's like critical thinking is really important, because you said you had a religious upbringing too, right? And I think a lot of that's common in the skeptic community, right? You become very process oriented because of that, because you're like,
your brain becomes very
process.
like algorithmic, which also didn't help that in high school the high school that I went to after the private school was a magnet school that had a program that mimicked how college operates. So you picked a major and you stayed in that major for 3 years, and it was eligible for college credits on top of the regular courses that you would have. The downside is I only ever got one elective, because of course the majority of your studies were taken up by the one big course you picked on top of your regular high school courses. And I chose AOYT because I wanted to make video games. That ended up not being the path that I wanted to stay in, but I started learning C++, learning Java, learning SQL, and when I was learning C++, before we ever opened up a command prompt or opened up any like notepad document to start making your hello world, this is my first thing I've ever made spiel, the first assignment we were given was make an algorithm, make a flow chart about tying your shoes. And almost everybody in the class failed it. Because it turns out that when you're making a program, you can't assume anything. Everything has to be spoon-fed to it. But that's not how our brains work. We are lazy, pattern-seeking people. So we shortcut things all the damn time. So something like putting on your shoes. My teacher would look at somebody's assignment, I don't remember whose it was, and just went, so you're just not wearing socks? Oh, well, why would I not wear socks? Okay, cool. So how does the computer program know you're wearing socks? Okay, cool. So they put the socks, and goes, so you're doing this standing up? Well, no, I'm doing it standing up. How does the computer program know you're doing that? And so they'd have to add, they went from like 3 or 4 steps for their flowchart to 18 steps.
I listened to a presentation from Steve Jobs very, very early, like right after Apple, like the Apple II came out, and he was talking about it. He was explaining it to people in the 70s, you know, and he's like, well, who here knows what a computer is? To people who literally had never interacted
with one before.
Yeah, and he basically, the way he explains is like a computer is the dumbest thing in the world. Like you have to give it extremely explicit instructions, like minor, you know,
to the tiniest little thing,
absolute step, but it is faster at doing that one thing. It's 1,000 times faster once you give it those instructions.
It's the same thing as an old style printing press. There's a ton of like little minutia that goes into getting everything spaced out correctly, making sure that everything's backwards the way it's supposed to be, getting it all ready in the press. But once you have everything set up, you can make 1 million books a day.
Yeah.
Like it can only do that one book for a while, but you can make a lot of them.
Yeah, and a lot of people, you know, like in the real world, like and this is kind of like how I have tried in my community, I've tried to improve things and realized why rules and systems are important is because people come in with no knowledge about something. People come into a motorcycle world without knowledge, and they think it's kind of easier than it is. I'm trying to explain something like why lane splitting is safe. Why is it safer to be closer to other vehicles or in between other vehicles? That isn't a thing that intuitively people feel like that can't possibly be safer. But you get into the actual data of like, how do people actually die? When do they die? Oh, the rear end crash is actually the most common crash.
Which means if you're in between the vehicles, the likelihood of the rear end crash goes down. Suddenly you're in the favorable side of the statistic.
Yeah, and you're and what actually happens is not that you are closer and things are scarier, because the cars right next to you aren't the problem. Like, they actually create a pocket for you of safety, because the people that are a problem are the Teslas behind you that are in autopilot and aren't being paid attention to, that are literally just smashing into people because they're distracted, because that's what is actually happening on the streets.
It makes sense. It's also one of the reasons why for the Magic the Gathering channel that I have, I've got 2 major series of videos outside of my, like, let's complain about something Wizards did, or let's talk about something they did that's really exciting. That normal kind of let's follow what's going on in the game stuff. I've got 2 kinds of videos. I have my budget deck videos, which are made for people who are familiar with the game. If I make a very complicated deck that has a lot of steps to winning a game, I'm confident a player who's played the game for a few years can pick it up and go, oh, I see what this is doing. And then I've got a starter deck series where the rules are Wizards of the Coast made starter decks for $20. So this is going to be his $20 deck. But the cards either have to have, like, everything has to have reminder text. All of the cards have to be simple. No card can have more than 1 or 2 lines of text at all. If a card is approaching a paragraph, there has to be a huge justification for putting it in, and there has to be a low density of cards that do that. The commander in the front of the deck has to have a super clear way that you're winning the game. So, like, Wizards made a commander recently, a new Zamone card, that whenever you play a land, you get a creature that has a prime number of counters. It literally says, create a creature with a prime number of counters equal to the prime number of lands you're on, and it has a list of the prime numbers in sequence, and that's cool, but no new player is going to look at that and go, that's amazing. They're going to go, math? No, I don't want to do that.
For me, there's a reason I play red-white. I play red-white, we burn, and we go wide, and we smash.
So the deck that I just released a starter deck for, Arabelle, the Tainted Doll, I made a $20 starter deck for it. Arabelle's ability is, when she attacks, every player takes damage equal to the number of creatures you have on the board with 2 power or less, and then you gain life for the amount of creatures you have with 2 power or less. So I was like, oh, this is a perfect starter deck commander. A new player can read that and go, oh, I want little creatures on the board, and I want a lot of them, and every card is like, pay 4 mana, make 3 tokens. Pay 2 mana, make 2 tokens. This creature touches the board, make a token. And every token is a soldier. She's a toy, so it's like, hey, the deck is toy soldiers. There is no mechanic thing that cares about these being soldiers or that she's a toy, but she's a toy and she wants there to be soldiers. I have a fun deck name. She's a perfect starter deck commander. Everything is laid out perfectly for this to be a wonderful deck for somebody who's never experienced the game, because it's not hard to look at a board of, oh, there's 20 things here, but they're all the same thing. They're all little 1/1 tokens that don't do anything. That's not complicated. That's just big. That's fine. That's reasonable for a new player. A lot of that stuff that I learned in that AOIT class about not assuming that a new player can figure this kind of stuff out has helped a lot with that series, and it's also helped with my channel, because a lot of times I'll try to break something down in a way that, not a way that I understand it, but a way that somebody else can understand it, because they're the ones that need it, not me. I don't even hear myself speak.
Yeah, I also think there's also a level of education and mastery. And this is, of course, the thing that everyone has probably heard at this point, but like, you don't really know something until you can teach it to somebody who doesn't understand it. And you learn all of those details about what you're taking for granted in that knowledge by doing that. When I started my career, I'm in cybersecurity now. I've been working in a technical field for about probably like 12 years or something. But when I started, I was like really green, and the people around me, I got a job that was very fortunate. The people let me do things that they probably was not safe to do considering how little I understood, but like they just needed help. And through it, I learned to develop documentation. I just started writing things down. What are the explicit instructions? Writing down words I didn't understand, just kind of like as a sponge, because the people didn't really want me asking questions, and that's a challenge. A lot of people don't want to teach. Like it's a laziness of like not wanting to invest in other people. And of course, they'll blame you for the fact that you don't understand something that like they've never taught you, but like that's its own thing. Yeah. It's its own toxic problem. But yeah, like learning to do that, and then like learning to like developing that process of like, oh, and this is useful now because I go back and look at those notes. I can reference for myself too. It ingrains it in my brain. I can hand it to other people later that are in like, and yeah, like it's just, teaching is so important and critical, and it develops your own patience and it develops your own mastery, and we should be doing it all a lot more. Yeah.
It's the reason why when you're making a program, it's drilled into you by instructors. Hey, that's a cool line of code you made. Now I need you to hit space. I need you to type // and I need you to write out what the fuck that line does afterwards. I know it seems like you're working twice. I know it doubled your workload, but you're going to thank me, and the intern that we hire tomorrow who has to look at this is also going to thank you. So
that's a comment. That's a comment for your non-programming code. That's telling, so that you can say, hey, what the fuck does this line up here do? Because
the comment's there to tell you.
Yeah, and I learned to document my code really, really well because I fucking am so bad at it. And I would come back in, I'd be like, what the fuck, what the fuck was I thinking when I wrote this? Like that just, that happens.
No, it's a very important thing. And to be fair, like I still internalized all those lessons from when I took those courses, but I eventually learned that programming is not a thing for me. I enjoy using a computer as a tool, but I don't necessarily enjoy figuring out all of the little inner workings of something. I much prefer people, is probably the easiest way to put it. I like being an entertainer. I like talking about stuff that I'm very passionate about and then teaching people about that stuff that I'm passionate about. There's a lot of people at the card shop that started watching my Magic videos because they didn't have a lot of money, but they wanted to be able to play well. And I would literally just take the decks that I made for my channel, bring them to the tournament, and go, all right, guys, this deck's $15. It might not be stronger than everybody's deck here. And then now, if I try to say that, somebody will yell from across the card shop, it's bullshit, don't listen to him. It doesn't mean anything.
And Magic, I feel like, is such a great tool for learning critical thinking because it is about this word means this things. And as the game develops, it becomes more complicated. So your first turns are fast and easy, but then your fifth and sixth turns take longer.
They start to slow down.
And it's also a game where like the less skilled person or the person with the lower quality deck maybe, or the less expensive deck can win. You can have success. It's not impossible, in the same way that like a good poker player doesn't win every round of fucking every hand of poker,
they figure it out. Like the thing that it's very hard to ingrain to people when they're learning the game is that a 51% win ratio in a one-on-one is what you're looking for. That's good.
Yeah.
Once you hit like 55% wins, you're doing phenomenally well. Like you are doing amazing. If you're starting to get more than that, Wizards may start looking at the cards in your deck as potential bans, which happened recently. Nadu got banned out of Modern, thank God, because that's what was happening. It had like a 75-78% win ratio, and Wizards is like, oh, we made a mistake. And they had to write a whole article about how they made a mistake too, which was a fantastic read. It gave a lot of insight into the design process. It also was upsetting because it shouldn't have happened. But that's a general thing that happens when you're learning these systems, is you realize, oh, I'm not supposed to win every time. I'm not supposed to do this every time. I'm supposed to do it most of the time. And if I can do it most of the time, that's good. That's all that matters, is that I can do something most of the time. Which is a really hard lesson for some people to learn, it turns out.
Yeah, no, it is. And again, it's also like, as a motorcycle rider, I think that what keeps me safe is that I am able to predict. I don't ride. I'm going to tell your audience the truth. Okay. Don't let the cops see this video, but I don't follow traffic laws, period. I don't look at it that way. When I walk up to a light, I look left and right and I'm like, is it safe? And then I go if it's safe. And so like that, but like if you that's because I've learned to predict traffic better than other people. I know what people on the road are doing. When I'm driving 130 down the highway past all these other smaller cars, like I can tell what they're doing. I can react faster. And like magic helps you do that too. Like having the ability to think several steps ahead or to create plans for like, okay, if X happens, then I'm going to do Y. But if Z, if they do this, and then like thinking like, what could they do to me? Because I'm doing that on the road. When I'm riding past cars, I'm like, what is this? Has that car been in the same lane the whole time I've seen them, or have they moved? Did that person just come on to the on-ramp? Because if they came on, they might be looking to go 3 lanes over. That car coming off that on-ramp is more variable than the one that I've seen.
The one that's been on the road for the last mile.
Yes, and there are so many of those things that if you spend just years and years and thousands of miles going through the same, like you are able to predict that. But systematizing that. Yeah, and so that's been my bigger project now. And with the most recent video I made about Vosh, the reason it's 90 minutes, which is like 5 or 6 times longer than any video I've made other than like an interview video, but like an edited video, like is because I tried to provide as much of that larger context as possible. And there's a lot, and it takes a lot. And unfortunately, like if people are not ready for the to sit down and like learn, if the interest isn't there, you won't necessarily learn it. But
it's one of the reasons why I'm not sure if you're familiar with the creationist debater Dwayne Gish from years and years and years ago. At the very least, you may have heard the word Gish gallop once or twice. So he's the reason that term was coined. And he's the one who used the technique, and everybody noticed he was the one using it. So when somebody says Gish gallop, they're talking about Dwayne Gish. So Dwayne Gish, what he would do is in a debate, he would not choose to focus on a single thing. He would choose to verbally assail his opponent with usually about 10 or 11 talking points. And for anybody in chat who's been in a debate or watched a debate, you know how long it takes to deconstruct something that's wrong. It takes far fewer words to say something incorrect than it does to debunk something easily. As an example, we talked about the 1350 thing. The statement, 13% of the population makes up 50% of the violent crime. It's a statement about black people. It's a statement that is technically true when you look at FBI statistics. It's a very easy statement to roll off the tongue, and racists use it all the time. What they ignore is the nuance and the context. Their neighborhoods are being over-policed. The violent crime often happens as the tail end of an altercation with a police officer. The violent crime tends to happen as the tail end of having to do something like steal food for their family or steal a television so they can afford something afterwards. Or the violent crime happens as a result of having to get involved in the drug trade, a drug trade that they wouldn't have had to get involved in if they had access to money and capital to begin with, that they didn't have access to because of redlining back in the fucking 30s and how generational wealth didn't get to accumulate. But holy shit, I just introduced about 8 different fucking concepts, and now I've got to talk about what is redlining, how did that affect people's ability to buy a home?
Suddenly you're on the defensive because they're going to question you on that too. And now we're not talking about all the 10 bullshit things they said. No, you're not even talking about the core of what you started at.
No, I'm having to correct one thing, and I'm having to go over, all right, redlining is what happens when there's a district that's cut off on not racial lines, but it just happens that everybody there is black, and everybody on the other side is white, and the banks won't give money to the people on that side, so now they can't afford houses in the white neighborhoods, so now suddenly they're stuck on the other end of the red line, and it's not really racist, right? But only the people that are stuck there, for the most part, just happen to mostly be the race that it was targeted at in the first place. So you're having to go through all of this shit to explain something because they said one wrong thing out of 11 wrong things. So Dwayne Gish would do this all the time with creationism, as he would say, like, the earth is 6,000 years old. Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins. We'll just say a few things, and then the person would have to go, All right, so we know that lead exists, right? Okay, cool. We know lead exists. What is the radioactive half-life of lead, and what is the mineral that comes before it? Oh, depleted uranium. Okay, let's talk about the half-life of uranium and how it leads to lead. Do we see uranium in the world to study and figure out what its half-life is? Absolutely. Does lead exist in the world? Cool. What does that mean? It means that we've had uranium that depleted to lead. How did it deplete to lead? The half-life was spent. How does a half-life get spent? Fucking time. And you're going through all of that, and now suddenly you've explained that, and they go, but carbon dating only shows the Earth is 5,000 or 50,000 years old, and you just go, I said radiometric, motherfucker.
Yeah,
Stop.
And they know what you're gonna say, right? And that's the thing that I think the audience or became more apparent to me. And again, I talk about it in my Vosh video, is like how much of it is like intentional, like it's intentionally designed and disruptive. It's not. These people were not walking in with the intent to synthesize an opinion between the two or come to a new understanding. They are there to dogmatically defend something and conserve something. And just real quick, I want to respond to Fennec the Cat. I'm glad you can safely do that. My black ass would get shot by the cop. So I ride a motorcycle. I think I mentioned this in the video explicitly, but I ride a motorcycle so that I don't have to interact with the police. That's why I love my motorcycle. It prevents me from needing to interact with the police because I can go 140, 150, and cops are fucking cowards. Like, they will never do it. They don't even want to ride their own motorcycles. The only cops that get to ride motorcycles are the ones that love fucking writing tickets because they just love that, and they won't go that fast. They're cowards. And anyway, yeah, very easy to get away from cops on a motorcycle. But
you would never do that. Never.
Yeah, I would. I absolutely. I mean, good luck proving that in court. But exactly. I mean, you can say anything on the internet. Yes. No, I've and that's part of Ben when Vosh watched my video, he didn't even really engage with it, like that was, I made the video very explicitly, like the funny part is if you watch it, like it's very generous. And I end it by basically saying, hey man, if you want, like I'm actually, you live down in Tacoma, I live in Seattle, I'll literally come to you and I'll teach you to ride a motorcycle on my motorcycle, and we can overcome this, because I think that's what you need, is the experience.
What he needs is the exposure there.
Yes, and I offer that to him directly. And what does he do? He's not, because I knew that his fans would watch it and they would tell him that, and he molded, and he cried and he said no, he wouldn't do that, and he wouldn't even talk to me, but like, and that was disappointing, but that's why I did it that way, because I was like, okay, well, if you're not going to engage with me, if you're not going to talk to me, it's going to become apparently obvious that your goal is not to learn or grow, or you are defending your own pride.
And for my part, like I consider Vosh a friend. But when, like, the J.K. Rowling thing you and I talked about before going on the stream, there was a video that I ended up having to make about Vosh years ago, because he had an altercation with J.K. Rowling where the response to J.K., as shitty of a person as she was to just do the misogyny thing, which isn't really the right tact there. So I had to talk to him about it. I'm like, okay, I need to know where you're coming from for this, because I'm going to talk about this on a video no matter what. But I do need to know where you're coming from this before I talk about this, because that was a thing. That was a thing. And again, we talked about it a little bit. The motorcycle thing, I think, is mostly, and you had the same opinion, or at least you gave this opinion to me. I more echoed it. The loud noises, if somebody is on the spectrum, a lot of times that is a very disruptive thing. It stops everything, and it becomes something that you create defensive barriers for. And for somebody like Vosh, that might be very, very rhetorical, as in using rhetoric as a defense there. Like, I know for me, there was an experience I had where somebody had a subwoofer that was very loud while me and my friends were at Buffalo Wild Wings after a Magic the Gathering tournament. And I don't know what brand of subwoofer they have, but it was enough to rattle the brick building, and it caused people got migraines. People got migraines as a result of it. Everybody inside that building, because your inner ear is getting, like, there's tones you can't hear that your inner ear is screaming about. And I was just sitting there like, man, in a perfect world, somebody would go and just beat on his window. Dear God, guy. And in that situation, it's a bit different, because the dude's just sitting there being actively disruptive Whereas on a motorcycle, again, it's a safety thing. You want a motorcycle to be loud. You want it to be obnoxious, because the thing is, if two cars crash, there's a crumple zone keeping the two people somewhat safe. If a motorcycle crashes, you've learned to fly.
Yeah. I do. Yeah. And that's, I want to defend. So in the video, I explain how I don't really like loud noises either. Like, I don't like my motorcycle is louder than I would want. And the only reason it's louder is because I slapped on a performance piece of equipment, a performance exhaust, which and like, it's lighter, it makes me ride faster. And by the byproduct is that it's louder, and that sucks. I do want to defend though, like, and as much as I understand the people on the spectrum and the disruption, I talk about also how I try to be real quiet in neighborhoods, like, and at night, like I do understand the loudness, and
you try to be a sensible person for the people.
Totally. There was a person right down the street here who I don't think they were talking to me, but somebody literally wrote a sign. It was like, hey, your loud vehicle is cool and all, but like, we just had a baby, please keep it down. And I just didn't go anywhere. I just didn't go near that street.
You just avoid that
for
street.
6 months. Yeah, I just totally avoided it, just in case.
Perfect sense.
Yeah, but like, I do want to defend that, like, the reality is there are cultural realities too. Like, the loud person with the speakers, like when in Alaska, like people with big subwoofers and like vehicles that were larger, it made more sense because snow, and like we would have to pull each other out of ditches and shit. Like, Alaska's a very different, I think I saw some of your chatters talking about that life. Like, it's a different type of life. And so, yeah, I want to defend people with the culture. Like, it's not always, I don't think it's about being disruptive. I think sometimes it's about attention, and it's about enjoying the sounds. A lot of people in the spectrum, I think, are into motorsports because of the sounds and the tactile, physical feelings that you can get.
It gives a scratch on the brain.
Yeah, and so that's the weird, like, that's the wild part, right? It's two sides. It's the same type of people, just in two spots, and not having enough empathy for each other, and like, we need to come together. And
unfortunately, I've talked about this on my channel before, but unfortunately, we also run into the problem where if people are it's a twofold problem. One is a spectrum issue. One is a societal issue. The spectrum issue is, it's very much harder to empathize and socialize with people and get past that barrier of what's the best way to put it? That barrier of anger? No. Aggression? No. But definitely hostility. It's hard to get past that bit of hostility when you're in your own mind and you are used to operating in your own mind, and the other person is also used to operating in their own mind and trying to communicate to each other as, this is what it's like from my perspective. It's already going to be harder for some people who are on the spectrum. Now, granted, neurotypical people have similar problems, but for different reasons. For neurotypical people, it's usually arrogance, right? That's usually where it ends up coming from. Well, I know what it's like. Well, maybe not. But the other side, that's a huge issue. This is one of the reasons why I like things like Magic the Gathering so much. It's why I wanted to have the conversation about motorcycles and community with you, is that when we are looking at how society is operating right now, we've become far more atomized. The suburban planning project, which I've talked about a few times on my channel, where everything is put into compartments. There's a retail compartment you go to. There is a food compartment you go to. There is a living compartment you go to. If you're in a city, all that shit's blended. If you go down to Philadelphia, there are residential areas that are sandwiched next to the businesses, and you are going to like a card shop in somebody's neighborhood. If you're in New York City, you are in an area with lots of apartments, but there's also street vendors that are right there. There's also a bodega that's apart from you where you're going to be getting your groceries. It forces people to socialize a lot more. It forces people to interact with people a lot more. It's also one of the reasons people in cities tend to be less bigoted. They get exposed to more people more often. It's just how it works. So we have a twofold problem of people who are not treated well by society to begin with, never being given the tools to communicate to begin with, and due to things like neurodivergency, might not have that tool set inherently and have to learn it, but then our society's not really built to allow them to learn it. It's built very hostile to people who are neurodivergent. It's built very hostile to people who want to go out and have that very social life. They'd rather it be online, where you're doing things like being bombarded by advertisements all the time. You still are when you're outside, but There's a bicycling channel that talks about walkable cities all the time that I absolutely adore anytime it comes up on my feed, and it's made me want to do content on walkable cities because of the socialization aspect. People are just far more likely to engage in human interaction when their third place is a couple feet down the road as opposed to 20 miles away.
Yeah, and motorcycles, and that's the thing, again, I didn't realize getting into it. None of these are reasons I got into riding, but motorcycles they're very community oriented. You know, I think it was the first time I broke down, I like out of gas, pretty classic, right? Motorcycle, especially on older motorcycles, their gauges were less, like they didn't have them at all, and you kind of just had to know, or like over time they just stopped working, whatever. But like I break down, and I would like instantly people or the riders are stopping and being like, "Hey, are you okay, man? Are you okay?" Like that doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen with cars. No,
it doesn't happen in a car because cars are like whatever. You're in your box or whatever, or like you're just not thinking with that community. And that was why it was great.
There's also the stories that you get told growing up, which do happen to a degree, where somebody is using the pulled out on the side of the road in need of help as a scam to try to kidnap people or a scam to try to rape people. A lot of those horror stories are kind of perforated around. So when you see somebody on the side of the road in a car, the immediate thought is, well, what if they try to abduct me? Whereas if somebody's on the side of a motorcycle, just thinking about it from the perspective of, well, what could they possibly do?
Yes. Well, the central nugget of that is a personal safety aspect, which is how so many things. Fear is the thing that I have identified that it seems like is like the core nugget of like, and again, conservatism. How do they keep you in line? With fear of consequence,
you get fear
of punishment. How do the cops keep you in line? Fear. That's not what I want to do. I want to show, and that's what I really try to demonstrate in the community, is the positive aspect of it is like, motorcycles are awesome. Motorcycles are fun. Yeah, you can die doing it. You can die doing pretty much anything, man. Like you can die eating too many fucking cheeseburgers. Like but do you live? Do you live, or do you just exist to try not to die? And I think that's what atomization does. Is it's part of it is like it's like using fear to disconnect,
to not die. You start existing
protect
to
yourself.
Survive.
A lot of those, like the fear of the hitchhiker murdering people, like that's all fucking propaganda from the 70s about trying to keep beating it because people were hitchhiking to places. And
it's the Hookman story that we get that's like technically an entire conversation about don't have sex when you're out of wedlock is what it ended up being. Did you ever get told the Hookman story growing up?
No.
Okay.
Totally new lore to me.
So the Hookman story goes, it's a paraphrasing version, but the Hookman story goes something like this. There's a news broadcast about a murderer going around outside, and he is attacking teenagers in their cars, and he's using a car to try to bring, like, he's doing a combination of being on the side of the road and abducting people and killing them, or finding people who are in like your classic lovers hot spots where they take the car and they go have sex away from the parentals, right? So the story goes, this person is hurting these people who are doing these things that we don't like, right? Because the base of the story is don't deal with hitchhikers, don't go and have premarital sex. That's the real base of the story. But the end of the story is this couple deciding that they still want to go out, they still want to do this, they've been planning on doing it for ages, and then the final bit of the story is the scene of a murder where there's just one hook that's embedded into the side of the car where they broke open the window and the couple is dead inside, and the inference is obviously, they did the thing they weren't supposed to do, now they are dead. And there's a billion different versions of this kind of story, but the basis of it is, let's make people afraid of going out and doing this thing that just people are gonna do no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, anything, you can find we live in a world of 7 billion people. You can find examples of literally anything, you know, I mean, like, I'm sure a lot of I don't know if you cover politics, but I'm sure that some of your people watch the debate, right? And now it's just discourse about whether people are eating dogs or whatever. And it's like, I'm just like, yo, do you think that pets aren't getting eaten in like in cities by like fucking people that are living on the fucking fringes that are like, do you think that just never fucking happens at all? Because you can find, right? And that just exists. Like things just kind of exist, but it's how much are you propagandizing it? How much are you putting energy into that
you're
thing?
using that to specifically talk about Haitian immigrants. Why are you using it specifically to talk about Haitian immigrants? Also, I realized that the name of the story is typically called The Hook. I just found the Wikipedia article on it. Where he goes, the basic premise involves a young couple cuddling a car with the radio playing. Suddenly a news bulletin talks about a serial killer with a hook that just escaped. For varying reasons, they decide to leave quickly. In the end, there's versions where they decide to leave and the hook's embedded in the car. There's versions where there's a police report and the hook's embedded in the car. Either way, the couple shouldn't have been doing the thing. They should have been home with their parents. Yeah. That's how they died. So yeah. I was like, I know this story, but I know I don't remember all the details. Oh, thank you, Wikipedia. Yeah. You have all the details for this.
But anti-hitchhiking, like a lot of this propaganda was started in the Nixon administration because people were beginning to protest and they were hitchhiking and they were fucking
there were people who were disenfranchised and didn't have automobiles, so they needed to get to a protest.
Yes. And so this is so it's like, oh, we gotta quit that. Like we gotta emphasize these stories.
This is the same era that realized that the government was no longer in a position where it could be racially motivated on paper. So they decided to say, well, the weed, we'll bust people for weed, and we'll make sure that Mexican communities have more of it. We'll bust people for crack cocaine, and we'll make sure that the black communities have more of it. We'll make sure that the Black Panthers are turned into a criminal organization. We'll have the FBI and CIA infiltrate these different progressive groups, and then they ended up becoming the Bloods and the Crips. Like, all of that's Nixon-era shit.
Yeah. And like people, where it's, again, because there's a really famous book called Thinking Fast and Slow that I, again, highly recommend people. Talks about the lazy thinking versus the deeper thinking. But,
type 1 thinking versus type 2 thinking.
Yeah.
Because in philosophy circles, that's what that would be. Your intuition versus your logical brain.
Yeah. So he talks about how all we see is all there is, right? What the scope of what we have, like what we will ever know versus the number of things that are possible of knowing is zero, right? Like, I mean, but all we see is what there is. So we kind of just assume that like what we know sorry, let me go back to the point. The point is that policing is like sold on protecting people, right? And we know it's not. And like one of the obvious ways I think you can kind of look at it is like what crimes are emphasized? What are people talking about? And versus what actually do they do? And if you go look at like, I think a lot of people don't know that if you go look at like murder clearance rates, they're really fucking low. There was a motorcycle rider that had like a huge campaign because he posted a video of him going like 170 on this highway between Colorado Springs and Denver, and it was a whole stunt, and the cops went after him. They made a whole PR presentation over it, right? And I made a video that was like, look, I get that this guy is scary and people are obviously fucking enraged, and you could have just killed anybody. 170 that could have exploded into a bus of children, right? But it's like, and I pointed out, I'm like, Colorado Springs has like a 40% murder clearance rate. Like what they're doing with your money is chasing around this guy who made them look embarrassing or whatever because they got a lot of phone calls from people complaining about a fast motorcycle rider. Meanwhile, people are dead. People are dead and the murders are not being solved. And why do you feel safer? Why does that make you feel safer? It doesn't make me feel safer. We're not prosecuting violent crime. The tax dollars are not going to that. They're going to suppressing the traffic enforcement and bullshit drug charges and things that do not actually create a safer society by like hyper focusing on.
The thing it is far easier for us to see things that we are told to be afraid of, right? So like when we're talking about drugs, the reason that it's so easy to get people in line with anti-drug propaganda is because they think of two things. What if my kids were on it? That's that first line of defense is always go for the kids. That's why Reefer Madness was what it was. It targeted parents who were worried about their kids getting taken by marijuana, the deadly
parents who
plague.
Haven't done drugs, who just haven't tried the drugs. They're not a big deal.
Parents who've never tried drugs, and so it's easy to get people like upset and angry about their kids possibly falling into this stuff, but also it's easy to go like especially if you're in a city, right? It's very easy to go down the street and see somebody having a bad day and assume that they're on something. Like, oh, that guy's tweaking over there. They're having Gosh, I'm glad that's not me. I'm glad that's not my kid. It's visual. It's in your brain. When you think of somebody who's high on something, that's going to be what your brain goes to all the time. And while I'm a very straight edge person, I don't like drinking alcohol. I have never gotten drunk, but I have gotten high. But I also didn't like it when I got high. Like, I came back the other day going, I think I was good. Like, I lost an afternoon, and I think I had fun. But I just don't want to. I just don't want to do it again.
Drugs require practice. You get better at them the more you do them. Let me tell you.
You become an expert on drugs.
Let me. I mean, but I can. So I'm gonna leave in 5 minutes. But let me emphasize. Like, I connect with that a lot. One of the things that made me really unique to my friend groups is that I didn't drink or do any drugs until I was 25. Mm-hmm. So I went all the way through high school. I still went to the parties with my friends. I was in all the sports. I existed in those spaces, but it was expressly known that I would never drink. And I was always the DD, and I was always just kind of like the guy.
That's kind of how I've been.
Yeah, and that was so great. I enjoyed that. There was nothing wrong with that experience. But as I got older, I realized the reason is because there was alcohol abuse, there was drug abuse in my family, and I feared all of the negative consequences of jail, of domestic abuse, of all of those problems would come onto me if I did that. I just connected those two things and said that's
you had a mental barrier there.
Yes, and then as I got older, I was like, actually, that's not really, I just experimented. Like, I just drank some liquor and I was like, nothing happened. I didn't hit anybody. I didn't scream at anybody. And that just slowly expanded out. And until like, I went to a giant like music festival and did like LSD and Molly and like felt like and was like, oh, like I'm having a great time. This is amplifying. Yeah, and I was with friends, who had already done it, and like we had tested stuff, and just realizing, you can take precaution. It's a tool, just like the Adderall that I take for my ADHD is,
For mine, it was I had never felt like I was in a safe enough environment emotionally to try, but with my partner Saki, I did feel safe enough to try. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of letting it be watching Evangelion while high. That was one of my two experiences doing that. I'm like, this was like, we both agreed afterwards, maybe like in the slew of things we could have chosen to put on the television, maybe Evo was not the one.
Yeah, I will tell you, a lot of the stereotypes about how people do drugs, I don't connect with. I like to do drugs and like take a walk with my dog and just let my mind wander, like put some music on and just think, allow myself to think and process emotions. I find that I'm more connected to myself emotionally. Like, I can process things better through weed. Like, if I'm really like getting really high and just kind of like, I've like cried about things, that I'm like talking to people. That's like part of my Discord. I'm like having these conversations with people. I'm writing things out. Like part of my divorce, like I was writing notes about it. I was kind of like processing alone because I couldn't process with my partner. I think there's interesting ways, and like microdosing mushrooms, like I definitely understand how like there are people who that helps them get out of depressive states, because I know that when I do it, I feel
it allows
happier.
It allows them to actually start being introspective instead of escaping, which to be fair though, that is the other side of that can be a little dangerous when it comes
why
to
you're
drugs.
Doing it is important.
Sometimes somebody can end up using it as an escape instead of confronting their problem, and that ends up being an issue. So it just depends on how you're using it. Alcohol is the same way. For some people, it's a social lubricant they use when they're out with their friends so that they're just a little less apprehensive. And then there's some people who use it and they just end up being completely flabbergasted butt-fuck assholes. Like, it just entirely depends.
Alcohol is one of the worst drugs, because actually alcohol, even though it is so normalized, it is actually one of the worst things. It is directly cancerous.
It has some of the most long-term effects.
Yeah, it is.
Like, it is literally poison.
It is far worse than coke. I mean, I would really like cocaine, mushrooms, LSD, weed. I think of all of these things as less dangerous than alcohol, because a lot of them you can't just do all the fucking time the way you can do alcohol all the time.
You can't just go to the bar and go, hold on, honey, I need a new line.
No, yeah, I mean, I did LSD and I was out for like 13 hours, like, and the next day I like my, in the body, like I didn't want to do it again, I had done so yeah, anyway, but like that, I totally connect with that. I think it's really good to start not doing it, but then I think that being just afraid of it, like that's the thing, right? Fear once again is driving bad emotional decisions, not logical decisions based on data and reality.
And that's why, like, the one of the books that I've really liked, and it's less a book and more of a grouping of college. Wow, why am I blanking on the word there? Not exams, but when an instructor... lectures, there we go. Why do they blank on lectures? But it's a grouping of college lectures put into an audio book, and it's called The Philosopher's Toolkit. And one of the earliest lessons in it is about type 1 versus type 2 thinking. And the example that's given is, let's say you're out in the city and you hear rustling in the bushes behind you. Your type 1 thinking thinks there could be anything in there. It could be a murderer. It could be a lion. It could be these things. And it's because of that part of our brain that grew up on the savannas of Africa where that was the case. And that's how we were able to survive, is we heard that thing, associated it with fear, and we got the fuck out. That was our survival mechanism. The type 2 part of your brain is the part that goes, but I'm in the city. It's probably not a murderer because it's 3 fucking p.m. There's cops everywhere. That's probably not what's happening. It's probably a cat. It's probably a squirrel. It's probably the wind. Like, all of those, it's more logical for it to be these things. Occam's razor coming in and slicing away all of the assumptions. That's what type 2 thinking is and does. But a lot of people have no way of telling which one is which. They get motivated by that intuitive fear response and they think it's logical, or they start using logic to justify that fear response. Like, as an example, somebody's racist, they don't want to say they're racist, they start talking about all these statistics about the race that they happen to not like to justify that afterwards, and they think that that's them being logical. No, it's really not.
And the problem with overt fear is overt fear prevents you from having cautious and reasonable precautions. Like motorcycles are dangerous, yes, but the whole point of my channel and the content I create is like, yes, but you can be safe.
Make them
we can
safe.
Wear gear.
We
can learn techniques. We can do things to mitigate it and still get the benefit without the dying part of it. So I'm gonna let you go.
Yep,
it's
I gotta
about
time
for you to go ahead
and take care of your stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. This has been super fun. I enjoyed talking to you, and I'm glad to meet your audience. Your audience seems super cool. I didn't interact much with the chat because I can't do that.
You want to focus on one thing at a time. Makes perfect
sense.
But
it looks like you got some cool people there, and they're welcome to come to my community. Or ping me in your community if you have questions or whatever following up. But check out Overton on Steam. I haven't done enough personal promotion, so I'm gonna go ahead and
bridge off of this one. It'll work perfectly fine. Also, there should be a link to Squid Tip's channel in the description of the video when this goes live on YouTube as a video, so please go check out the community over there.
Yep. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, Suris. Good talking to you.
Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.